Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In 2007 and 2008, dozens of patients died after receiving heparin, a widely used blood thinner that had been contaminated during manufacture in China. The number of drug products made outside of the United States doubled from 2001 to 2008. This trend will accelerate, creating potential risks to patients from substandard and otherwise adulterated drugs. Today's hearing will examine our increasingly global supply chain and assess how effective agencies like the FDA have been in protecting American consumers. The Government Accountability Office has found that the FDA does not police the drug supply chain effectively and recommended that the agency make several specific policy changes to address these problems. Unfortunately, FDA has failed to adequately respond to these recommendations. Some of these GAO recommendations have been outstanding since the late 1990s. FDA has still not implemented them. In part due to these failures and the corresponding risk to public health, GAO has placed FDA on its high-risk watch list of government programs. GAO has not called for sweeping legislation to solve these problems. Instead, GAO calls for FDA to administer its programs and manage its responsibilities more effectively. Following the Help Committee's July hearing with Commissioner Hamburg, I asked FDA a question for the record concerning the progress it has made on the GAO's recommendations. I still have not received a reply. We all want to make sure FDA has the tools it needs to make sure drugs are safe and effective. To do that, we need to obtain the facts. It'll be hard for us to devise solutions if FDA is not more forthcoming about the facts and more responsive to Congress. Having said that, I understand that legislation to improve supply chain integrity is a top priority for Chairman Harkin and Commissioner Hamburg. I look forward to working with them, and let me suggest 4 principles to guide our work together. Our first principle should be that we are as specific as possible in identifying the problem we're trying to solve. One good example of the specific problem is, under current law, FDA must inspect domestic drug establishments every 2 years. But the law is silent about how often FDA must inspect foreign drug establishments. This means risky foreign establishments can avoid FDA inspections, and American companies bear more regulatory burden. Now, Heather Bresch, the CEO of Mylan, has championed a change in law to level the playing field. I agree. FDA should be able to target inspections globally based on risk. Second principle, before making new law, we should ask if FDA is using its existing authorities effectively. For instance, FDA promulgates current good manufacturing practices, or GMPs, to tell companies how to manufacture drugs. Despite all the obvious risks of globalization, FDA has not updated its GMPs on point. The Active Pharmaceutical Ingredient Guide was last published in 1998, and a Quality Systems Approach Guidance was last published in 2006. FDA published a GMP questions and answers guidance earlier this year, but it does not address the globalization challenges we're discussing today. We need to know why FDA hasn't updated its Know Your Suppliers GMPs. Third principle, we should develop solutions that actually solve the problem. Some ideas sound good in speeches, are politically dramatic, and make us feel like we're, quote, doing something. But they won't necessarily make a dent in the real-world problem. For instance, some stakeholders advocate giving FDA mandatory recall authority for drugs. We can discuss that, but I'm skeptical it will make a real difference. FDA already has mandatory recall authority for medical devices and several other types of products. But according to GAO and the Institute of Medicine, FDA has only used its mandatory recall authority for devices 3 times. Examining the data, GAO found the average time it took FDA to effectuate a Class 1 medical device recall, those posing the greatest risk to consumers, was 516 days. Also, these recalls were not always effective. There were situations where devices that should have been recalled were implanted in patients, causing several deaths and serious injuries. And remember, this is when the FDA already had mandatory recall authority. Fourth principle, as we legislate, we should not overreach. For example, some stakeholders advocate for a complete pedigree or track and trace system for the distribution of drugs. A 2008 Accenture study pegged the cost of a full track and trace system at up to $110,000 for an individual pharmacy. Small independent pharmacists in Wyoming are already under intense pressure from cuts in Medicare Part D and Medicaid reimbursement. They are small businesses and can't afford this additional cost. Moreover, most counterfeit and substandard drugs reach consumers through internet sales, not retail pharmacies. Track and trace could impose tremendous costs on pharmacies, but produce only a marginal effect. Again, I look forward to working with Chairman Harkin on all these issues. I have been a strong supporter of giving FDA the tools it needs. For example, Senator Kennedy and I co-sponsored a drug safety bill in 2007. The New England Journal of Medicine said it was the most significant drug safety bill in a half-century. I also helped with the FDA new food safety and tobacco authorities. But right now my concern is FDA over-regulating, not under-regulating. In closing, I want to acknowledge that FDA's witness today, Deb Otter, only recently assumed her new position as Deputy Commissioner. She inherited many challenges. Deputy Commissioner, you deserve credit for taking on a tough job, and I look forward to your testimony.
Thank you very much, Senator Enzi. We have basically two panels. Our first panel will be